The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes it waits for a dog to find it. Where are you watching from? Tell us your city and country in the comments. Samuel Carter stood silently beside the porch of the small house he had called home for nearly 4 decades. The cold Colorado wind moved through the valley, rattling the loose boards along the railing and carrying the scent of pine from the mountains beyond. At 68 years old, Samuel looked older than his years. Deep lines marked his face, and the silver in his beard seemed brighter beneath the gray morning sky. Beside him stood Rex, a large German shepherd with alert ears and intelligent brown eyes. The dog remained close, pressed against Samuel's leg, as if he already understood that something important was ending. A bank representative stood near the driveway holding a clipboard while another loaded the final paperwork into a truck. Neither man looked comfortable. Across the yard, Samuel's son, Michael Carter, avoided making eye contact. The silence between them felt heavier than the mountains surrounding Pine Ridge Valley. "It's done, Dad," Michael finally said. "The property transfers today." Samuel stared at the house. The paint was faded. The roof needed repairs. The porch leaned slightly to one side. But every board carried a memory. His wife had planted flowers there, years ago. His son had learned to ride a bicycle on that gravel driveway. Christmas lights had once hung from the gutters every December. It had never been a perfect house. It had simply been home. "You could have fought for it," Samuel said quietly. Michael lowered his eyes. There was too much debt. Samuel nodded. Medical bills, missed work, years of carrying wounds that nobody could see. The war had ended decades ago, but some battles never truly left a soldier behind. The bank representatives finished their work and drove away. Gravel crunched beneath their tires before the sound disappeared down the road. Michael placed a small envelope on one of the boxes in the bed of Samuel's old pickup. "There's some money in there," he said. Samuel never touched it. A few seconds later, Michael climbed into his car and left. Samuel watched until the vehicle vanished behind the trees. Then he was alone, almost alone. Rex nudged his hand gently. Samuel looked down and managed a tired smile. "Guess it's just you and me now, partner." Rex wagged his tail once. Samuel climbed into the pickup and started the engine. It coughed twice before finally turning over. He drove away from the only home he had left. The road wound through the valley, beneath towering pines and distant snow-covered peaks. Nearly an hour later, the truck sputtered and died beside an abandoned stretch of road. Samuel tried the ignition again. Nothing. He sat quietly behind the wheel. Then a memory surfaced, a voice he had not heard in years, his grandmother's voice. "If you ever lose everything, Samuel, remember the old land and remember the key." Samuel reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around a small rusted key he had carried for decades, without understanding why. He stared toward the mountains. Somewhere beyond those forests stood the ruins of his grandmother's property, abandoned for 30 years after a fire destroyed the house. Everyone in town said there was nothing left there, except stone and ashes. But his grandmother had never been the kind of woman who wasted words. Rex suddenly stood upright in the passenger seat and stared toward the mountains as if he sensed something waiting there. Samuel looked at the dog, then back at the key in his hand. For the first time that day, a small spark of purpose flickered inside him. He opened the truck door, stepped into the cold mountain air, and adjusted the strap of his backpack. "Come on, Rex," he said quietly. "Let's find out what she wanted us to see." Together they started walking toward the forest, unaware that beneath a forgotten ruin, a secret buried for 30 years was waiting for them. The forest trail climbed steadily into the mountains, winding through towering pines that seemed untouched by time. Samuel Carter followed the narrow path, with Rex moving a few feet ahead, occasionally stopping to glance back, as if making sure his owner was still there. The afternoon air had turned colder, and shadows stretched across the ground beneath the trees. After nearly 2 miles of hiking, Samuel paused to catch his breath. "You know, Rex, most dogs your age would be sleeping on somebody's couch right now." Rex responded by wagging his tail and continuing forward. Samuel chuckled softly. "That is what I thought." The trail eventually opened onto a ridge, overlooking a forgotten valley. Samuel stopped. Below them, partially hidden beneath overgrown grass and clusters of pine trees, lay the remains of his grandmother's property. Even from a distance, he recognized it immediately. Well, there it is, he whispered. Memories returned without warning. Summer afternoons helping his grandmother carry vegetables from her garden. Winter evenings beside a fireplace, while she told stories that always seemed to contain lessons hidden inside them. Rex stood beside him, ears forward. You remember this place? Samuel asked jokingly. No, I guess you do not. They made their way down the slope. Loose rocks shifted beneath Samuel's boots, forcing him to move carefully. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sun was already dropping behind the mountains. The old house was gone. Only fragments of the stone foundation remained. Charred beams lay scattered among tall weeds, silent reminders of the fire that had destroyed everything decades ago. Samuel walked slowly through the ruins. Grandma always said there was more here than people realized. Rex suddenly darted ahead. The German shepherd began sniffing around the foundation with unusual focus. He circled once, then twice, then a third time. Samuel noticed immediately. What do you smell, boy? Rex ignored him and continued searching. Near the center of the foundation, the dog stopped, his ears lifted. His body became perfectly still. Samuel approached. At first, he saw nothing. Then he noticed something hidden beneath vines and fallen branches. Two weathered wooden doors lay flat against the ground. Samuel stared at them. No way. He knelt and pulled away the tangled growth covering the surface. Rusted iron hinges emerged beneath decades of dirt. His grandmother had been telling the truth. The cellar was real. Rex stepped closer and sniffed along the edges. Then he sat beside the doors and stared at Samuel. You want me to open it? Samuel asked. Rex thumped his tail against the ground. Samuel laughed for the first time in days. I cannot believe I am taking advice from a dog. The fading sunlight painted the valley in gold as Samuel pulled a flashlight from his backpack. He grabbed the iron handle and tugged. The doors resisted at first, then groaned loudly as they slowly opened. A rush of cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. Stone steps disappeared into shadows. Samuel shined the flashlight down the stairway. The beam revealed only darkness. Rex stood immediately. His posture changed. Every muscle in his body seemed alert now. Samuel looked at the dog, then into the cellar. Looks like we found something after all. But before either of them took a step forward, Rex suddenly turned and stared toward the far side of the ruins. His ears stood straight. His eyes locked onto something hidden among the trees. Samuel followed his gaze and felt a strange chill run through him. What is it, Rex? The dog did not move. He simply kept watching the forest as the last light of day disappeared behind the mountains. Samuel stood motionless for several seconds, staring toward the dark tree line. Rex remained fixed on the same spot, ears high and body tense. The forest was silent, no footsteps, no voices. Only the distant whisper of wind moving through the pines. What do you see, boy? Samuel asked quietly. Rex did not look away. Samuel waited another moment before finally shaking his head. Probably a deer. Even as he said it, he was not completely convinced. The uneasy feeling lingered. Eventually, Rex relaxed slightly and turned back toward the open cellar doors. Samuel exhaled. All right, one mystery at a time. He switched on the flashlight and aimed the beam down the stone steps. The light disappeared into darkness. After you, he said with a faint smile. Rex immediately started down the stairs. Samuel followed carefully behind him. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, a flashlight revealed a small stone cellar, untouched by time. Dust floated through the beam of light. Wooden shelves lined one wall. Rusted jars sat forgotten in corners. A small table stood against the far side of the room. Everything looked exactly as if someone had simply walked away and never returned. Samuel slowly turns in a circle. Grandma, what were you hiding down here? Rex moved ahead, sniffing along the floor and walls. Samuel walked toward the old table. His flashlight illuminated a metal lantern covered in dust. He picked it up carefully. I remember this. For a moment, he could almost hear his grandmother's voice again. Storms used to knock out the power across the valley. She would light the lantern and tell stories while the rain hammered the roof above them. Samuel placed it back on the table and continued exploring. Then Rex stopped. The German shepherd stood near the far wall, staring at the ground. What is it? Samuel asked. Rex pawed at the dirt once. Samuel chuckled. You finally found that mouse? Rex scratched again. Dirt scattered across the floor. Then he scratched a third time, harder. Samuel frowned. Hold on. He walked over and knelt beside the dog. The ground looked ordinary, but Rex clearly disagreed. The German Shepherd continued digging with growing determination. "You are not giving up on this, are you?" Samuel glanced around the cellar and spotted an old rusted shovel leaning against the wall. He picked it up and drove the blade into the dirt where Rex had been scratching. The soil felt surprisingly loose. Samuel removed one shovel full, then another. After several minutes, the metal blade struck something solid. Clang! The sound echoed through the cellar. Samuel froze. Rex immediately stepped closer. "What was that?" Samuel whispered. He dropped to one knee and brushed dirt away with his hands. A flat metal surface appeared beneath the soil. More dirt revealed sharp corners, a rectangular shape. Samuel's pulse quickened. No way. Together they cleared the remaining dirt. Slowly, an old military field chest emerged from the ground. Faded green paint still clung to the metal surface. Samuel stared in disbelief. Rex sat beside him, tail wagging slowly as if he already knew what they had found. Samuel rested a trembling hand on the lid. "Rex," he said softly, "what exactly did you just uncover?" Samuel stared at the military chest for several long seconds before finally reaching for the rusted latches. "You have gotten us this far, Rex," he said quietly. "Let us see what was worth burying." The first latch resisted. The second opened with a sharp snap that echoed through the cellar. Slowly, Samuel lifted the lid. A cloud of dust drifted into the flashlight beam. Inside were several cloth-wrapped bundles, arranged with surprising care. Rex stepped closer and sniffed the edge of the chest. Samuel reached in and removed the first bundle. The cloth unfolded to reveal a bronze military medal. His breath caught immediately. No. He picked it up with trembling fingers. This cannot be. He recognized it instantly. It was the commendation medal he'd had received after his second deployment overseas. The same medal he thought had disappeared nearly 30 years earlier. Samuel stared at it in disbelief. I looked everywhere for this. Rex sat quietly beside him. Samuel carefully placed the medal on the floor and reached for another bundle. This one contained photographs. Some showed a younger Samuel in uniform. Others showed family gatherings on the old property. Then he found a photograph of his grandmother standing beside a smiling woman he recognized immediately. Emily Dawson, the former church secretary. "What were you doing with all of this, Grandma?" Samuel whispered. Beneath the photographs lay several yellow envelopes tied together with faded string. Samuel froze when he saw the handwriting. He knew it instantly. Margaret Carter, his grandmother. His fingers hesitated before untying the bundle. The first envelope had his name written across the front. Samuel Carter. He carefully opened it and unfolded the letter inside. The paper crackled with age. As his flashlight moved across the page, his eyes widened. "My dear Samuel, if you are reading this, then life has not been kind to you. I prayed you would never need these letters. But if you have returned to this cellar, then the truth must finally be known." Samuel swallowed hard. Rex remained perfectly still. He continued reading. "There are people in Pine Ridge who know more than they have ever admitted. Some remained silent because they were afraid. Others remained silent because the truth benefited them." Samuel lowered the page. "What truth?" he asked aloud. He turned to the next letter. This one was written years later. It mentioned meetings, financial records, conversations overheard after church council gatherings. Then one name appeared. Victor Holloway. Samuel frowned. The respected pastor had been one of the most trusted men in Pine Ridge for decades. Why would his grandmother keep mentioning him? Samuel opened another envelope. More notes. More references to missing money. More mentions of Victor Holloway. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Rex suddenly stood and walked a few feet away before looking back toward Samuel. "You think there is more, do not you?" Samuel asked. The dog wagged his tail once. Samuel looked down at the final page in his hand. One sentence had been underlined by his grandmother years ago. "The man who destroyed your reputation is not the man this town believes him to be." Samuel felt a chill run through him. For the first time in 30 years, he began to wonder if the story Pine Ridge had always believed was built on something far different than the truth. Samuel sat on the dirt floor for a long moment, staring at the letters spread around him. The flashlight cast long shadows across the cellar walls, while Rex quietly watched from a few feet away. 30 years, Samuel murmured. 30 years, and I never questioned any of it." He picked up another envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from his grandmother describing conversations she had overheard after church meetings. The same names appeared again and again. Victor Holloway, Emily Dawson, the town bank. Samuel rubbed his forehead. "What were you trying to tell me, Grandma?" Before he could continue reading, Rex suddenly stood and walked toward the opposite corner of the cellar. His ears lifted, his nose pressed close to the ground. Samuel looked over. Not again. Rex pawed at the dirt once, then twice. Then he began digging with determined energy. Samuel laughed softly despite everything. "You really are not finished, are you?" Rex ignored him and kept digging. Dirt scattered across the floor. Samuel watched for several seconds before grabbing the old shovel again. "All right, partner. Let us see what you found this time." He walked over and pushed the shovel into the soil beside Rex. The dirt gave way easily. After only a few minutes, the blade struck something hard. This time, it was not metal. It sounded like wood. Samuel immediately dropped to one knee and brushed away the loose dirt. A small wooden box slowly emerged from the ground. Unlike the military chest, this box looked older and more fragile. "Now that is interesting." Rex sat beside him with obvious satisfaction. Samuel carefully lifted the box and set it on the floor. The lid creaked as he opened it. Inside were several bundles wrapped in oilcloth. Samuel unfolded the first package and froze. Bank documents. Old bank documents. He quickly spread them beneath the flashlight beam. Transfer records. Account statements. Authorization forms. His eyes moved across the pages. Then his breathing slowed. No. He picked up another sheet, then another. Every document pointed to the same period 30 years ago, the year his life collapsed. Samuel flipped through the records faster. His pulse began to rise. "This cannot be real." Rex watched quietly. One transfer record caught Samuel's attention. A large amount of church money had been moved from the community fund into another account. Samuels stared at the account number. Then he looked at the account holder listed at the bottom of the page. His entire body went still. Victor Holloway. Samuel read it again, then a third time. The name never changed. More records followed, more transfers, more signatures. Every trail led back to the same person. For decades, the town believed Samuel had stolen the church funds. But these records told a completely different story. "You found it," Samuel whispered. He looked at Rex. "You actually found it." The German shepherd wagged his tail slowly. Samuel leaned back against the wall, overwhelmed by what lay before him. The shame he had carried for 30 years suddenly felt different. Lighter. Because, for the first time, he was staring at proof that he had never been the guilty man. Pine Ridge believed him to be. And somewhere above them, beyond the dark forest and sleeping valley, a respected pastor had no idea that the foundation of his carefully protected lie had just begun to crack. Samuel sat in silence as the flashlight illuminated the documents spread across the cellar floor. The truth was beginning to take shape, but the shape was uglier than he ever imagined. Rex lay beside him, his head resting on his paws, watching quietly. Samuel picked up another page from the wooden box and studied it carefully. Every number matched. Every transfer pointed in the same direction. Victor Holloway had not merely accused Samuel 30 years ago. He had benefited from the accusation. Samuel leaned back against the stone wall and closed his eyes. Memories rushed forward. He was 38 again, standing inside the church office, while members of the council stared at him. He could still hear Victor's calm voice. "The evidence speaks for itself, Samuel." At the time, Samuel had felt completely alone. Nobody questioned the pastor. Nobody asked whether the evidence could have been wrong. The entire town accepted the story because it came from a man they trusted. Samuel opened his eyes. "I should have fought harder," he whispered. Rex immediately lifted his head and nudged Samuel's arm. Samuel managed a tired smile. "You disagree?" Rex thumped his tail once. "Yeah, maybe you are right." He looked down at the documents again. For years he blamed himself for everything that happened afterward. Losing work, losing friends, watching neighbors avoid him, watching his own son slowly begin to doubt him. But the papers in front of him told a different story. Someone had carefully built that lie. Someone had chosen him. A sudden gust of wind moved through the open cellar doors above. The sound echoed down the stone steps. Rex immediately stood, his ears pointed toward the entrance. Samuel noticed the change. "What is it?" The German shepherd stared upward without moving. Samuel switched off the flashlight and listened. For several seconds there was nothing. Then he heard it, a faint crunch, like a footstep moving across loose gravel. Samuel's body instantly tensed. Old instincts returned. Another sound followed, then silence. Rex released a low warning rumble. Samuel rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. Easy. They waited together in the darkness. Nearly a minute passed. Nothing else happened. Finally, Samuel turned the flashlight back on. Probably an animal, he said, though he was not entirely convinced. Rex remained alert for another moment before slowly relaxing. Samuel gathered the letters and documents into neat stacks. One page caught his attention. It was from his grandmother's notebook. The entry was dated only a few months after the church scandal. Margaret had written a single sentence in darker ink than the rest. If anything happens to me, the records beneath the cellar must stay hidden till Samuel is ready to see them. Samuel stared at the words. You knew, he whispered. You knew all along. He looked around the cellar. For the first time, he understood what his grandmother had done. She had spent years collecting evidence, protecting it, waiting, hoping that one day the truth would finally reach him. Samuel carefully placed the notebook on top of the documents. Then he looked at Rex. Tomorrow we go back to Pine Ridge. Rex immediately stood and wagged his tail. Samuel smiled. Something tells me the people in town are about to hear a story they never expected. Morning sunlight spilled across the valley as Samuel and Rex emerged from the forest. The military chest rested in a small wagon Samuel had pieced together from materials he found near the old property. It creaked behind him as they followed the road toward Pine Ridge. Rex walked proudly at his side. You know, Samuel said, glancing down at the dog, most people spend their retirement fishing. Somehow we ended up digging up 30 years of secrets. Rex wagged his tail. The first buildings appeared ahead, a gas station, a feed store, the old diner with the faded red sign. Samuel had not walked through town in months. Heads turned almost immediately. Conversations stopped. People recognized him. Some looked surprised. Others looked uncomfortable. Samuel kept walking. He had spent too many years worrying about what people thought. Today was different. Rex brushed against his leg as if reminding him why they were there. At the center of town stood Pine Ridge Community Church. Cars filled the gravel lot. Sunday service was about to begin. Families walked toward the entrance carrying Bibles and coffee cups. And standing near the church doors was Victor Holloway. The pastor looked older than Samuel remembered, but not by much. His silver hair was neatly combed. His smile was practiced and confident. For decades, people had trusted that smile. Samuel stopped at the edge of the churchyard. His stomach tightened. Memories returned instantly. The accusations, the whispers, the shame. Rex sat beside him and looked up. Samuel nodded slowly. Yeah, I know, no turning back now. Together they crossed the churchyard. The gravel crunched beneath Samuel's boots. Several people noticed him immediately. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Victor looked up. Surprise flickered across his face before the familiar smile returned. Samuel Carter, he said warmly. It has been a long time. Samuel stopped a few feet away. Not long enough. The smile on Victor's face weakened slightly. I hope you are doing well. Samuel glanced at the church behind him. I came to talk to the town. Victor folded his hands. Perhaps another day would be better. No. Samuel rested his hand on the military chest. Today is exactly the right day. More people gathered around them. Church members paused on the steps. Others moved closer across the lawn. Within minutes, dozens of eyes were fixed on the two men. Victor's voice remained calm. Samuel, if there is something troubling you, we can discuss it privately. Rex released a low rumble from deep in his chest. Several people stepped back. Samuel shook his head. What I have to say belongs in public. He opened the lid of the military chest. Papers, letters, notebooks, bank records. The crowd immediately leaned closer. Victor's expression changed. It was only for a second, but Samuel saw it. Concern. Real concern. Samuel lifted one of the letters into the morning sunlight. 30 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the churchyard. This town was told that I stole money from this church. Silence settled over the crowd. Samuel held the document higher. Yesterday, my dog found something buried beneath my grandmother's cellar. Rex stood beside him, alert and steady. Samuel looked directly at Victor Holloway. And what we found changes everything. The churchyard remained silent. as Samuel held the documents in front of the crowd. The morning breeze moved gently through the trees, but nobody seemed to notice. Every eye was fixed on the papers in his hands. Victor Holloway forced a smile. Samuel, old records can be misunderstood. Samuel nodded slowly. That is true. He lifted one of the bank statements. That is why I brought several of them. A murmur spread through the crowd. Samuel placed the first document on top of the chest and held up another. These records show church funds being transferred into a private account. Victor folded his arms. Anyone can make accusations. Samuel looked directly at him. Then let us talk about facts. He handed one of the documents to an older man standing nearby. The man adjusted his glasses and studied the page. His expression changed almost immediately. This account holder name is Victor Holloway. More whispers followed. Several people stepped closer. Samuel opened Margaret's notebook and held it up. My grandmother spent years recording meetings and conversations. She believed something was wrong, but she was afraid nobody would listen. Victor's calm demeanor began to crack. Your grandmother was mistaken. Samuel shook his head. Then Emily Dawson was mistaken too. The crowd stirred at the mention of the former church secretary. Samuel unfolded one of the letters. This was written by Emily before she left town. He began reading aloud. The letter described concerns about church money being moved between accounts and pressure to remain silent. When Samuel finished, nobody spoke. Victor stared at the ground. Samuel took a step forward. For 30 years, this town believed I stole from them. His voice remained steady. I lost work, I lost friendships, I lost my reputation. He paused, and all of it started with a lie. Victor finally looked up. You do not understand the situation. Samuel's eyes narrowed. Then explain it. The pastor opened his mouth, but no words came. A woman near the front of the crowd shook her head slowly. Victor, tell us he is wrong. Another voice followed. Then another. Questions came from every direction. The confidence Victor had carried for decades began slipping away. Samuel reached into the chest one final time and removed the transfer report Rex had helped uncover. This is the document that ends the argument. He held it high enough for everyone to see. The church money never disappeared. It was transferred. Silence returned. Victor stared at the page. His shoulders sagged. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he released a long breath. I never thought any of this would come back. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Samuel did not move. Victor lowered his head. The church was struggling. I moved the money. When questions started, I panicked. The crowd stood frozen. So you blamed me, Samuel said quietly. Victor closed his eyes. Yes. The confession hung in the air. 30 years of whispers, doubt, and shame collapsed in a single moment. Several people looked toward Samuel with disbelief and regret. Others simply stared at Victor. A deputy who had been attending the service stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. Pastor Holloway, he said calmly, I think we need to continue this conversation at the station. Victor nodded without argument. As the deputy escorted him away, Samuel looked down at Rex. The German shepherd sat proudly beside the open chest, unaware that he had just uncovered the truth an entire town had missed for 3 decades. 1 year later, the hills above Pine Ridge looked different to Samuel Carter. Or maybe he was the one who had changed. The small cabin sitting near the edge of the property was not large, but it was his. Morning sunlight poured across the porch as he stepped outside, carrying a cup of coffee. Rex followed close behind and immediately stretched across the wooden boards. Samuel smiled. You earned this view, buddy. The German shepherd thumped his tail against the porch. Below them, the valley glowed beneath the early summer sun. The events of the previous year had changed the town in ways nobody expected. The church publicly acknowledged the truth. Community leaders issued formal apologies. The records discovered beneath Margaret Carter's cellar had been verified by investigators, and Samuel's name had finally been cleared. For the first time in 30 years, people spoke about him with respect instead of suspicion. A pickup truck rolled slowly up the driveway. Samuel recognized it immediately. Michael stepped out and walked toward the porch carrying a paper bag. Rex stood, sniffed the air, then wagged his tail. Guess that means I can let him stay, Samuel joked. Michael smiled nervously. I brought breakfast. Samuel nodded toward the empty chair beside him. Then sit down. For a few moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Michael looked at his father. I should have believed you. Samuel stared across the valley. Maybe. Michael lowered his eyes. No, I should have. Silence followed. Then Samuel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. We cannot change 30 years, son. We can only decide what comes next. Michael's eyes filled with relief. Thank you. The two men shared breakfast, while Rex patiently accepted small pieces of bacon. Later that afternoon, several townspeople arrived carrying lumber and tools. Some came to help expand the cabin. Others simply wanted to visit. An elderly woman approached Samuel with tears in her eyes. I am sorry, she said quietly. I believed things that were not true. Samuel gave a gentle nod. Thank you for saying that. As the months passed, more people visited. Old friendships slowly returned. The military medal Rex had helped uncover was displayed inside the cabin, beside a framed photograph of Margaret Carter. Beneath the photograph sat a simple plaque that read, She protected the truth until it could be found. One evening near sunset, Samuel walked down the trail leading toward the old property. Rex trotted beside him, exactly as he had on the day everything began. They eventually stopped near the ruins of the cellar. Wildflowers now covered much of the ground. Samuel looked around and smiled. Funny, isn't it? He said. I came here thinking I had lost everything. Rex sat beside him. Samuel scratched behind the dog's ears. Turns out I was standing on the one thing nobody could take away. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. Golden light stretched across the valley below. Samuel looked at his loyal companion and laughed softly. You never stopped digging, did you? Rex wagged his tail. Samuel sat beside him in the fading light, surrounded by peace he never thought he would find again, grateful. Not only for the truth that had finally surfaced, but for the faithful friend who had led him to it one paw print at a time. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with friends who might enjoy it too. We would love to know where you are watching from. Tell us your city and country in the comments. More heartfelt and unforgettable hero dogs stories are already waiting for you. See you in the next one.